27 years, a vanished class, and a truth hidden in the shadows. What would you do if a single photo changed everything? Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We love seeing how far our stories reach. And if you don't want to miss tomorrow's gripping tale, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't believe what's coming next. Trust me, you don't want to be the last to know. Drop a comment below, and let's dive into this mystery together. The mysterious disappearance of an entire class. 27 years ago, on a bright autumn morning in September 1996, 15 students from Greenfield Elementary School eagerly boarded a yellow school bus for what was supposed to be an exciting class field trip. The children, all around 10 or 11 years old, had been looking forward to this day for weeks. Their teacher, Mr. Daniel Carter, a dedicated and well-liked instructor in his mid-30s, had planned everything carefully. He, along with a school administrator, would be supervising the trip. The destination was Brightwood National Park, a peaceful retreat just a few hours from their town. Parents had packed their children's lunches, hugged them goodbye, and waved as the bus pulled away, unaware that it would be the last time they ever saw their children. As the hours passed and the expected return time approached, parents gathered near the school parking lot, chatting amongst themselves, excited to hear stories from their children. But as the sun dipped lower into the horizon, an unsettling feeling began to spread among them. The bus was late, far later than it should have been. Calls were made to the school, to other parents, to local authorities. At first, there was reassurance. Maybe there was a delay on the road, maybe a mechanical issue. But when night fell, worry turned into panic. The school had not received any calls from the supervising adults, and neither the teacher nor the administrator could be reached. The entire class, along with their bus driver, had disappeared. The police were immediately called in, and what started as a simple missing persons report quickly escalated into a full-scale search operation. Authorities combed through every possible route the bus could have taken. Helicopters flew overhead, searching for any sign of a crash. Volunteers spread out across highways, backroads, and surrounding forests, hoping for some clue, anything that could explain where the children had gone. But there was nothing. Not a single piece of evidence. With no bus, no bodies, and no ransom note, investigators struggled to find a lead. They questioned school staff, parents, and local witnesses, trying to reconstruct the final hours before the class vanished. Suspicion soon fell on Mr. Carter, the teacher who had accompanied the children. His disappearance alongside them made him the prime suspect. Had he orchestrated the abduction? Had he betrayed the trust of his students and their families? But despite their theories, there was no proof. Mr. Carter had no known criminal background, and no witnesses had seen anything unusual before the bus left that morning. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Without evidence, without any new information, the case went cold. Over time, the story faded from the headlines. The school tried to move on. Parents were left in a cycle of endless grief, and the town of Greenfield became haunted by the loss. But not everyone gave up. Rebecca Mitchell, the mother of one of the missing children, refused to accept silence as an answer. She spent every waking moment searching for clues, hoping for even the smallest sign of her son, Ethan. Then, 27 years later, she finally found one, and it changed everything. A clue hidden in plain sight. For 27 years, Rebecca Mitchell lived in the shadow of an unanswered mystery. Every morning, she woke up with the same aching question. What happened to Ethan? Every year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, she visited the cemetery where a stone marker bore his name. A grave with no body, no closure, just an empty tribute to the son she lost. Most of the other parents had stopped searching, having accepted the painful truth that their children were never coming home. But not Rebecca. She couldn't. Somewhere, deep inside, she felt that the story wasn't over. On the morning of September 28, 2023, Rebecca sat at her kitchen table, her coffee untouched, staring at an old photo of Ethan in his school uniform. His bright eyes, his mischievous grin, it was frozen in time, untouched by the years that had aged her. The pain never lessened. It only became more familiar. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from her old friend, Susan Adams, another mother who had lost her daughter Hannah that day. "You're not alone today. If you need company, my door is always open." Rebecca hesitated before replying. Maybe being around someone who understood would help. She grabbed a few things, tea, some cookies for Susan, and stepped outside. The small suburban neighborhood looked the same as it had for decades. But to Rebecca, everything was different. She wasn't the same woman she had been before that fateful day. When she arrived at Susan's house, the two women embraced, sharing an unspoken bond of grief. They sat in the living room, sipping their tea in silence for a while before Susan spoke. "I was going through some old boxes the other day," she said, reaching for a stack of photographs. "I found some things from back then. Photos, reports. The police let us keep copies after they closed the case." Rebecca's heart pounded as she reached for the stack. She had spent years poring over old records, searching for answers where none existed. But as she flipped through the photos, one in particular caught her eye. It was a class picture, taken in front of the school bus on the morning of the trip. The students stood in neat rows, smiling, their little backpacks slung over their shoulders. Mr. Carter was in the photo, standing to the side. But what made Rebecca's breath catch wasn't the students. It wasn't even the teacher. It was the woman standing at the back. Principal Martha Brooks. Rebecca frowned. That wasn't right. She had always been told that only Mr. Carter and a school administrator had gone on the trip that day. The official records never mentioned the principal. If she had been there, why had no one ever said anything? "Susan," Rebecca whispered, gripping the photo. "Why is Principal Brooks in this picture?" Susan hesitated. "I don't know." The room fell into silence, but for the first time in 27 years, Rebecca had a lead, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. A mysterious encounter. Rebecca Mitchell couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Why had no one ever mentioned Principal Martha Brooks being there that day? Why had all the reports and witness statements only mentioned Mr. Carter and a single school administrator? If the principal had been at the scene, why was this the first time Rebecca was seeing proof of it? The more she stared at the photo, the more uneasy she felt. For 27 years, she had believed one version of events. What if that version was a lie? "I need to go," she told Susan, rising from the couch. Susan frowned, concern crossing her face. "Rebecca, don't do this to yourself again. We've chased so many dead ends before." "This is different," Rebecca insisted. "I need to know why she was there." Her heart pounded as she left Susan's house and walked toward the bus stop. She had never really spoken to Principal Brooks after the disappearance. There had been brief moments, when the parents protested outside the school, when she testified in court hearings, but Brooks had vanished from public life not long after. She had resigned early, moving away from the town's spotlight. But Rebecca still remembered where she lived. She arrived at the principal's old neighborhood, a quiet street lined with modest homes. She wasn't even sure if Brooks still lived there, but as she approached the house, she saw a car in the driveway and a well-kept garden, signs that someone was still there. Rebecca hesitated at the doorstep before knocking. What was she hoping to find? Would Brooks even talk to her? The door opened, and there she was. Time had aged. Martha Brooks, her once sharp features had softened, and faint lines creased her face. But there was something else, something in the way her eyes widened when she recognized Rebecca. She looked nervous. "Mrs. Mitchell?" Brooks' voice was polite but cautious. "This is a surprise. Can I help you?" Before Rebecca could answer, she caught movement from inside the house. A woman in her late 30s, with strikingly familiar features, appeared behind Brooks, watching curiously. Rebecca had never seen her before. "I just have a question," Rebecca said, keeping her voice steady. "About the day the students disappeared." Brooks visibly stiffened. She glanced back at the woman inside before stepping out onto the porch, closing the door behind her. "I'm sorry, but I've said everything I can on the matter," Brooks said quickly. "The case was closed a long time ago." "Then why were you in this picture?" Rebecca pulled the photo from her purse and held it up. Brooks' face paled. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then, too quickly, she said, "Oh, that must have been taken before the trip, at the school. I wasn't there when they left." But Rebecca had seen it. the slight hesitation, the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She was lying, and Rebecca wasn't leaving without answers. The shocking truth. Rebecca Mitchell felt her pulse quicken. Martha Brooks was lying. She had seen it. The hesitation, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She knew something. Rebecca took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I don't believe you," she said, her voice firm but calm. "You weren't supposed to be there that day. The reports all said it was just Mr. Carter and one other staff member. Why does this photo tell a different story?" Brooks pressed her lips together, her fingers gripping the edge of the door. She glanced over her shoulder at the woman inside the house, who was still watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. "I think you should go," Brooks finally said. But Rebecca wasn't leaving. "Who is she?" Rebecca asked, nodding toward the younger woman. The woman stiffened, her hands clasped tightly together. Something about her face sent a chill down Rebecca's spine. There was something familiar about her. "She's just a friend of mine," Brooks said quickly. Too quickly. Rebecca's gut told her otherwise. She turned to the woman, lowering her voice. "Were you there? On that trip?" The woman's eyes widened in shock. She glanced at Brooks, as if seeking permission to speak. Brooks' grip on the door tightened. "Don't," she whispered to her. Rebecca's heart pounded. "I think you were." The woman took a step back. For a moment, Rebecca thought she was going to run, but then her shoulders slumped and something in her broke. Tears welled in her eyes. I shouldn't be here," she murmured. Rebecca felt her breath catch. "Who are you?" The woman hesitated, then, barely above a whisper, she said, "My name is Amanda Whitman." Rebecca's world tilted. Amanda Whitman, one of the missing children. It was impossible. She was supposed to be dead. Rebecca's hands trembled as she took a step closer. You were on that bus?" Amanda nodded slowly, fresh tears rolling down her cheeks. Rebecca's mind raced. If Amanda was alive, what had happened to the others? "What happened to my son?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Amanda closed her eyes, pain flashing across her face. She knew. "Please," Rebecca begged, "tell me the truth." Amanda swallowed hard, then, voice shaking, she finally spoke. "They took us across the border, to Mexico. We weren't supposed to make it back." Rebecca's body went cold. "Who took you?" Amanda hesitated. Then, glancing at Brooks, she said the words that made Rebecca's blood run cold. She did. Rebecca's knees nearly buckled. Martha Brooks, the woman who had consoled the parents, who had acted as though she had no answers, had been involved in the disappearance all along. Rebecca's grip on the photo in her hand tightened. She had just uncovered a truth more horrifying than she could have ever imagined. Justice after 27 years. Rebecca Mitchell felt the world spin around her. Martha Brooks was involved. The woman who had consoled grieving parents, who had stood before the community pretending to be just as devastated as they were, had been part of it all. She could hardly breathe. "You're lying," she whispered, even though she knew deep down Amanda wasn't. Amanda wiped at her tear-streaked face. "I wish I was," she murmured. Rebecca's hands clenched into fists. For 27 years she had begged for answers. Now she had them, but the truth was more horrifying than she had ever imagined. "What did she do?" Rebecca's voice was shaking. Amanda hesitated, glancing at Brooks again. The older woman looked pale, terrified. "Tell her," Brooks said suddenly, her voice almost defeated. Amanda inhaled sharply. "She set it up," she said. "The whole thing. The trip wasn't supposed to be real. It was a cover. She was in debt, serious debt, to the wrong people. She promised them something in return." Rebecca felt sick. "What?" she forced out. Amanda's eyes filled with tears again. "Us." Rebecca's stomach twisted painfully. Her son, the other children, they weren't lost. They had been sold. Her entire body trembled as Amanda continued. "The bus never made it to the park," she said. "Instead, it was diverted to a remote location. The driver was killed. We were taken across the border, smuggled into Mexico. Some of the boys were forced into labor overseas. The girls," Amanda trailed off, looking away. She didn't have to finish the sentence. Rebecca's knees nearly buckled. She thought she was prepared for any truth. But this was hell. "My son," she choked out. "Ethan, where is he?" Amanda swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "He didn't make it. They overdosed him when they took us. I don't think they meant to kill him, but they got the dosage wrong. He was one of the first to go. The words hit Rebecca like a freight train. She had held on for 27 years, hoping, praying that Ethan was out there somewhere. But he was gone. She felt her knees give out, and for the first time in decades, she let herself break. The sound of sirens pierced the air. Martha Brooks turned toward the noise, closing her eyes as if she already knew what was coming. She didn't even fight when the police arrived. Rebecca barely registered the moment Brooks was placed in handcuffs. Her mind was still trapped in the past, in the echoes of Ethan's laughter, in the warmth of the little boy she had lost. But when Amanda squeezed her hand, she pulled herself back to the present. "I was the only one who made it out," Amanda whispered. Rebecca wiped her tears. "No, not anymore." And as Martha Brooks was led into the back of a police car, Rebecca finally knew justice was just beginning. This story is truly heartbreaking, and after 27 years, the truth has finally come to light. But it makes us wonder, how many other cases like this are still buried in silence? What would you do if you were in Rebecca's position? Would you keep searching for answers, even when everyone else had given up? Let's talk about it in the comments. Do you think justice was truly served? Should Martha Brooks face a harsher punishment for what she did? And what about Amanda? After everything she went through, do you believe she can ever find peace? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far our stories reach. And if you don't want to miss our next gripping mystery, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Tomorrow, we have another chilling story that will leave you speechless. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. So, go ahead, share your thoughts, theories, and reactions. We're reading every comment.